Hi and welcome to the video. In this particular video we're going to be looking at group policy objects and how we can use these to control aspects of the network or servers, devices, endpoints and or users so that certain policies will take effect every time a user or machine or server is added to the domain or network. To start with, we're going to go ahead and open up our group policy management console, and to do that we're going to click on Start. We're going to go to Windows Administrative Tools, and then we're going to scroll down to our Group Policy Management. In this case, I'm also going to pin this to our Start and also to our taskbar for easy access in the future. Currently, we're accessing this via our primary domain controller, which in this case is GB LND WPP ADDS 001, or it will effectively be the machine that we use to create the domain on. As we can see from the Group Policy Management window, we actually have the Group Policy Management console. We can see the forest currently selected, in this case ad.msptech.co.uk, and we have the domains underneath that, and in this case it's the ad.msptech.co.uk domain. Straight away we have a few options beneath this, and we can scroll through these currently, so we can see that at the top level of the domain we have the default domain policy currently applied. And then beneath this we have the OUs, or the organizational units that we created in our previous videos, and we can expand these out and we can go further down into each of these as we need to. As we finish looking at the organizational units just here, we can also see that there is a group policy object just here, and this is effectively the placeholder for all of the objects that we create. Once the policies are created, they will always be displayed here, and then we can link, as you can see via the shortcut icons here, any group policies to different parts of the domain or different OUs further down the chain. We also have a WMI filters option, which we will cover later on. However, this effectively just scans the device or applies a group policy based on a filtering that we select. That could be Microsoft Windows version, servers only, endpoints only, or particular attributes that can be looked for via the WMI. We also have starter GPOs, which we won't go into in this particular video, as we're going to be focusing on the actual group policy objects. Now in the first instance we have the default domain policy at the top here, and as this is listed directly at the top of the domain, this will apply to all devices beneath that or lower down the hierarchy. In the case of the default domain controllers policy, this policy is linked to the domain controllers OU only, and therefore will only apply to the domain controllers organizational unit. Or if we were to create additional OUs beneath that, it would then also apply to those. As a rule of thumb, the default domain policy is where all of the password policies are stored by default. And whilst you would not usually want to amend the default domain policy unnecessarily, password policies are one of the few exceptions where they are linked directly to this particular GPO. If we highlight the default domain policy now and we go along to the main window on the right hand side here, we can see there is an option that says Settings. When we click on this, this will generate a report based on what this group policy is actually doing for us. And on the right hand side we can go ahead and click Show All. And this will give us a full breakdown of what's going on, which we can then scroll down and see what's going through. For our particular example, we're only interested in the password policy, so we can have a look here. And we can start at the top. We can say General, Details, Links, Security Filtering, Delegation. As we scroll down, Computer Configuration, we can see there's Policy, Windows Settings, Security Settings, and Account Policies, Password Policies. We also then have Account Policies, Account Lockout Policies, as well as Account Policies, Kerberos Policy, Local Policies, Security Options, and then a few other options further down, Public Key Policies, Encrypting File System. For our example, we're only going to be looking at the password policy that's listed currently, and as we can see here, this is listed under the Computers Policies, Windows Settings, Security, and Account Policy Settings here. And we can see that the current setup of the policy has the following settings. So the policy is enforce password history, and then underneath the settings this will demonstrate what it currently is set to. So the current password history is 24 passwords remembered. What this means is that a user can set their password in the first instance, but they won't be able to reuse that same password until the 25th or after the 24th password has expired. We have a maximum password age, and at the moment that is currently set to 42 days, and this means that at a maximum of 42 days the user must then change their password. This will be as and when they log into the device. It will say that you must change your password now in order to continue, and will prompt them to update the password. Next option down we have is a minimum password age, and in this case this is set to 1 day. So that would indicate that a user who sets their password on day 1 will not be able to change their password for a full 24 hours, currently until 1 day has passed. The next option is a minimum password length, and in this case we currently have that set to 7 characters, which means that it has to have 7 characters in length at minimum. Next we have the password must meet complexity requirements. Now this is slightly different on different systems, but for the purpose of Active Directory and on-premise, what this effectively comes down to is 3 main areas. When this is enabled, the password that the user selects cannot contain any of the user account name or parts of the user's full name that exceed 2 consecutive characters. So in the example of a user called Roy, the password would not be able to have 2 of these consecutive characters or more than 2 consecutive characters following from that user's name. The second part of this is that it must be at least 6 characters in length. This is then overwritten by the minimum password length side, but this is just the standard for this particular item. The third is that it has to contain characters from 3 of the 4 categories listed, and that will be uppercase characters, lowercase characters, numerical numbers or numerical digits, and then non-alphabetic or numeric characters, which are typically symbols such as exclamation mark or $sign, etc., etc. Finally, we have the store passwords using reversible encryption. This is currently disabled. By default, this option will always be disabled unless there is an extreme use case. This should never be enabled. Typically, by enabling this option, it means that the password can be retrieved or is stored, air quotes, in a clear text environment, which means that they're much easier to be able to gain access to. So unless there is a very particular use case, this should always remain disabled. These options that we've just discussed just here typically are the password options or password settings, and this dictates the types of passwords that users can use. As we go further down, we can also see that there's a lockout policy, and this is the account lockout threshold. So settings is 0 invalid login attempts currently. What we can do, what would be best practiced across multiple of the security and ISO standards, is to have, after so many invalid login attempts, that we automatically lock the account. And then after a period of time, the account can either be unlocked or we can require it to contact the IT team to unlock that account. This is typically to prevent brute force password attacks. At this point, we've now gone through the high-level options of the default domain policy, particularly around the password enforcement and password policies. Typically, the settings here to be changed would be dictated by either the security officer within the company, or if there are ISO and or security compliance that needs to be adhered to. So working with the correct people in the organization, we can set these to the required amount. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to go ahead and change the policy slightly, and we're just going to run through how we do that. So in the first instance, we're going to select our default domain policy, And we can do this either at the top level where it's currently linked to, or we can select it under the group policy objects also. But once we've selected that, we're going to go right click, and we're going to go ahead and click edit. This will now bring up our group policy management editor. Now from here we can browse to the location of the policy, as there are lots of options here, and then we can assign the correct details as needed. As a quick cheat to where the locations are, if you're unable to remember, we can minimize the management editor down. We can go back to our settings and we can click show all once again. And from here we can see that the policies assigned here are under computer policies as we scroll down, and then we can scroll to these, expand these particular areas to get to where we're going to. So if we bring back up our editor, we can see that the current policy we've been looking at is located under computer configuration, which we can select here. We can see that it's a policy, which is just here. We can see that it's a Windows settings, so we can expand this. We can also see that this is next a security setting, so we can go ahead and expand our security settings. Just bring this along slightly. And then we can see that it's account policies, password policies. And to do that, we can go ahead to account policies just here, expand this, and we can see that now we actually have all of these options listed. So there is the password policy just here, which replicates what we have. We also have the lockout policy, and we also have the Kerberos policy, which we won't cover at this point in time. So we're going to go ahead and select our password policy, and we're just going to expand this out slightly. And we can see from here that the policy matches, and as we amend the details in the editor here, when we update this, the policy will update also. As mentioned, ideally when creating password policies across the company or organization, any particular ISO or security compliance areas that need to be included should be obviously be contacted, and we should work with those departments to make sure that the policy matches what's needed. In this particular instance, we're going to go ahead and change these just for the purpose of demonstration and show how these reflect. And then obviously in your own individual environment or circumstances, reach out to the correct people that would have those details available. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and change the enforce password history. And we can see this is the number of passwords remembered. And if we're ever unsure of what a part of a policy does, we can click on the explain, and we can see that the details are listed here. At this point here, it also gives us a minimum maximum. So the security setting determines the number of unique passwords that have to be associated with a user account before an old password can be reused. The value must be between 0 and 24. If we go back to our security policy settings, we can see that we're actually at the maximum. So from a security point of view, this would be the most that we can actually do. However, for the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to go ahead and change this to 20. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and click apply. We're going to go ahead and click OK. And this will now change to 20 passwords remembered. Looking at the next option, we're going to look at the maximum password age. So we can go ahead and double click on this. And again, we can use the explain feature here. And once again, we can see there's a minimum and a maximum, and there's also a default. We can also see the note at the bottom here that it's a good security practice to have passwords expire every 30 to 90 days, depending on the environment, as well as a couple of other details, and then finally, as mentioned, the default of 42. So for this particular setting, we can go back to security policy settings. We're going to go ahead and change this to every 30 days. Again, this might be different in your particular organization, but typically 30 seems to be the most average or common for most environments without strict security policies. So we're going to go ahead and select 30. We're going to apply that. We're going to go ahead and click OK. So we can now see that we have 20 passwords remembered, and that the maximum password age is 30 days. Minimum password age, we're going to leave this at just 1 day for the time being, so we're going to leave this option as it is. However, minimum password length, we're actually going to change this. So we're going to go ahead and select this. We're going to go to explain, and we can see that the details here dictate that there has to be between 1 and 14 number of characters. And we can see that 7 on domain controllers, 0 on standalone servers. We can read through all of these details if required. When we click on this security policy setting, we're actually going to go ahead and change this to 10. So we're going to remove the 7 and go to 10 characters. We're going to go ahead and click apply, and we're going to go ahead and click OK. At the next option here, we have minimum password length audit. This is currently a not defined option. So when we open this option up, we can go ahead and click on explain, and this will explain as to what is going on. So minimum password length audit. This security setting determines the minimum password length for which password length audit warnings events are issued. This setting may be configured but from 1 to 128. You should only enable and configure this setting when trying to determine the potential impact of increasing the minimum password length setting in your environment. If this setting is not defined, audit events will not be issued. We can continue on for the rest of the explanation here. However, as mentioned in here, we're not going to enable this particular option, as there is no need to, as we're not looking to see what the outcome would be of changing this. We can go ahead and close that one. As mentioned previously, password must meet complexity requirements. We're going to leave that as enabled unless there's a very unique case or use case to disable this. This should always be enabled. Finally, the store passwords using reversible encryption, as before. Unless there is a very particular use case, we should always leave this disabled, and then only enable in very particular use case scenarios where there's a requirement. Obviously, the complexity requirements is defined, and this is currently enabled, and there are only 2 options for this. And the same with store passwords using reversible encryption. There is only 2 options, enabled and disabled. However, for the purpose of this video, we can see that we've now changed the password history to 20, maximum age to 30, and minimum password length to 10. We can now go ahead and close this off with the cross. And we can now go back to the policy here. If we right click on this and click refresh, what we'll find is that'll refresh the page. We can go ahead and click show all. And when we click show all, if we scroll down, what we will find is that the password policy has now changed. So we have the enforced password history now set to 20, maximum password age of 30, and also minimum password length of 10 characters. And this is effectively how we would set the top level default domain policy to include our particular password requirements. Now that we've amended the group policy, we're going to go ahead and jump onto one of our endpoint devices, log in as a user, and attempt to change the password. So we're going to take the first machine that we've rebooted. Obviously, with the group policy to take effect, best practice is to reboot any machine that needs to update. And in this case, we're going to log in as Mervyn. So we're going to go ahead and log in with Mervyn's current credentials. And in this particular instance, the password has already expired, so we need to change that, which is absolutely fine. So we're going to go ahead and click OK. And it's going to ask us to confirm the new password. In the first instance, we're going to try and use a non-complex password, or one that does not meet the complexity of the group policy. Now we know the minimum number of characters is 10, so we're going to try and change the password to a password of only 9 characters. We're still going to use uppercase characters and lowercase characters and some numerical numbers, but we're only going to do the 9 characters. Once we've typed in the 9 character password, we're going to go ahead and click submit, and we should be presented with the message that says unable to update the password. The value provided for the new password does not meet the length, complexity or history requirements of the domain. We can go ahead and click OK to this. And once again, it will ask us to prompt us to update the password. So we're going to type in the existing password that we have currently. And now we're going to try a minimum of 10 character password. We're still going to be using uppercase characters and lowercase characters and some numbers. But as mentioned, it will be a 10-digit password. In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once we've done that and we've confirmed the details, we can go ahead and click submit. And that will change the password for us, and we can see the password's been changed successfully. now happen is the user account will continue to load and the new password policy will have taken effect. If we go back to our current domain controller, what we will find is that we have a minimum password age of 1 day. And we can test that this is also working correctly by going back to our end user account. And now that this is done, we can restart the machine in this instance. Once the machine's restarted, we can attempt to change the password after logging in. And providing the group policy has taken effect correctly, this should prevent us from changing that password. So that's just restarted, and we're going to go ahead and log in. Now, just in case that the user wasn't prompted to change the password, once the user has logged in, we can press the Control-Alt-Delete keys, and that'll bring up our menu here. We can go ahead and click Change Password, and this will prompt us for this same screen. So in this case, we're going to type in our current password that we've just set. And then we're going to go ahead and type in our new password. And this can be any new password, but for the example here, we'll make this slightly longer. And when we go ahead and click submit, what we'll find is that we're once again unable to update the password. And in this particular instance, the reason that we won't be able to update it is because we set the security policy to a minimum of 1 day for the password to be changed. We can go ahead and click OK. We can click cancel to this for the time being and cancel here. If this policy isn't usable, then obviously we can amend this within the group policy, and we can actually change this to a different length if needs be. This video has just covered the password policy that we would edit within the default domain policy. In the next video, we'll be looking at creating a blank group policy and applying certain security features.